Some people think if you care about truth, you should be pro-free speech. In fact, this idea is often thought to be one of the basic principles of a liberal society. What we find when we drill into it is a funny mix. Some important grains of truth, alongside some optimistic speculation and naivete. The person most associated with this idea is the 19th century English philosopher John Stuart Mill. But to understand the idea's roots, we need to go back 200 years before Mill's time to the astronomer Galileo. Galileo wasn't the first scientist to challenge the geocentric thesis that the sun orbits the Earth. But his work provoked charges of heresy from the Catholic Church, and he spent the last years of his life imprisoned, with his books banned. Now, there's a very long track record throughout human history of authorities punishing dissent. But something more was happening with Galileo. He wasn't just expressing his opinion. His work contained observations and insights that everyone needed to hear. Punishing Galileo wasn't just the authorities shutting up a rebel. The suppression of dissent had turned into the suppression of real knowledge. The lesson of this episode was that if we let political authorities suppress heresy, human knowledge can get held back. In his famous defense of free speech, On Liberty, Mill built on this insight. The crux of his argument was that for any questions we're asking, we need conflict and competition between ideas in order to uncover the truth. Censorship is a way of trying to prevent that competition. Free speech is how we protect it. In the early 20th century, a version of this idea was taken up by America's Supreme Court as a theory of the First Amendment. In a 1919 dissent, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes encapsulated this in words that had a huge influence through the 20th century. The test of truth is the power of a thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. So why might we see this as naive today? The problem is that silencing dissent is only one of the techniques that powerful people can use to suppress truth. There's another way to suppress truth, which we can call the dilution method. For example, there's good evidence that carbon dioxide emissions are causing a climate crisis. Switching to a low-carbon economy would eat into the wealth of some very powerful people. These people aren't able to directly silence or punish the scientists warning us about this, but they can suppress their work by flooding public debate with misleading information and skeptical reactions to the evidence. If those people are willing to buy enough airtime, they can silence the truth by drowning it out in a sea of falsehoods. So what's the lesson? Well, firstly, even if free speech is a necessary condition for intellectual progress, it's not sufficient for it. But the point goes deeper. There's a kind of dilemma in the relationship between free speech and intellectual progress. Free speech seems necessary for progress, but it also creates conditions where powerful people have the ability to sabotage progress. It's hard to have free speech as an exceptionless rule without giving the powerful free rein to use something like the dilution method to suppress truth and push their own agenda. What's the solution? The classical liberal answer is education. We hope that an educated public can tell the difference between well-financed propaganda and real evidence. It's hard to be optimistic about this solution in our current media climate. But I also think there's another subtler reason why we might feel doubtful about it. Think about universities. They're meant to be a key institution in providing the intellectual resources that the public needs to think critically. But universities themselves face a version of this dilution problem. Universities are supposed to be committed to free speech, and this is often thought to require them to be ideologically neutral. This means that each university and each professor is free to investigate the questions and hypotheses they want to, and to fund this research using any money they are offered and want to accept, no matter who the funder is or what their ideological orientation might be. But if that's how we arrange things, it gives the super rich another way to dilute knowledge. Because universities are expensive, it's hard for them to say no if a wealthy patron offers to fund a research center. And if one university says no, the patron can keep making their pitch until another one says yes. This patronage ends up influencing the research agenda towards topics and hypotheses that line up with the interests of the powerful. The danger then is that a strict policy of ideological neutrality can allow the super wealthy to buy up influence in higher education. And if this ends up undermining universities in their special role of supporting critical thinking, then our ability to resist dilution methods in public discourse seems sure to get even worse. So, if we do care about truth, it isn't enough to just be in favor of free speech. We also have to figure out ways to counteract the dilution problem and to combat the influence of people who are trying to subvert our society's intellectual aims.